turn in your Bibles, we will be looking at Genesis 34, but I would encourage you to turn to Luke chapter 9 as we begin. There's no way about it, no way around it. The message today is one of the most sobering, it's covering one of the most sobering portions of Genesis, I believe. Not since the destruction of Sodom, in my opinion, have we come across a passage that is as sobering and shocking as this one. There are others which will top it, but this is the strongest one, I think, since. And I don't think it would be rightly understood by us if we didn't start out here in Luke chapter 9. There's a lot of things here in Luke chapter 9. You probably don't have any idea where we're going to start. I'd like you to look with me at something that actually happens in a place not far from the same setting here, same place. Luke chapter 9, verse 51. When the days drew near for him to be taken up, he set his face to go to Jerusalem, and he sent messengers ahead of him, who went and entered a village of the Samaritans to make preparations for him. But the people did not receive him, because his face was set toward Jerusalem. And when his disciples, James and John, saw it, they said, "Lord, do you want us to tell fire to come down from heaven and consume them?" But he turned and rebuked them, and they went on to another village. Now we read that and smile. We think, oh, those men. Can I just submit to you, it was a serious request. And let that sit in for a minute. Let that just sink down for a second. It was a sincere request. How far does that seem from what we just talked about, the compassion of Jesus and the mercy of Jesus, his whole mission and purpose? How little did the disciples understand about what he was coming to do? They had seen him do so much. They were the chosen disciples of the apostle, of the Messiah. They were in this inner circle. And they saw their position, their nearness to God's purposes as privilege, as status, as a right to somehow not be offended. And if offended, to call down fire from on heaven. Because these people, what? They didn't receive him. The Samaritans perceived in Jesus an insult, that he was insulting them because his face was set to Jerusalem. He didn't really want to stay and visit them so much at this time. He was going somewhere else. And they were offended by that. Why is Jerusalem any better than Samaria? Just another Jew treating us like Samaritan dogs. Something like that. Some perceived slight. Now we know the character of the Lord Jesus. He gave them no reason for this other than what they wanted to read into it. He was just going to Jerusalem. But they weren't willing to receive him for that insult. Far from exercising hospitality, they would not receive him because of this. And the disciples then, having been wronged, escalate the matter and seek to consume these people with fire from heaven. That'll show them. That'll teach them. They didn't know who they were messing with. This is the Messiah. Bow and serve, right? Something like that. It seems so out of place, so far from a Christian attitude. And yet, it's in the same chapter and after the transfiguration. I mean, it's shocking. Well, beware, right? Don't let this be you. Let's turn to Genesis chapter 34. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, I ask that you help me today to teach and so to speak, that the shocking nature of this chapter and the sobering warning that it is for us, the helpful reminder, will produce in us all the godliness that it ought to, all the fear and trembling and the seriousness with which we will pursue holiness. There's one Savior given to men, and we praise you for him. We ask that he would be all the more precious in our sight as we see these things that are hard to look at. We ask this in Christ's name. Amen. Well, the title of the message today is The Defilement of Dinah and the Revenge of Israel. The defilement of Dinah and the revenge of Israel. And I hope, as you hear me say that, you don't hear me speaking badly of one side of that, the defilement of Dinah, and speaking well on the other side of that, the revenge of Israel. God has said, vengeance is mine, I will repay. And I very much, I hope you don't leave here. I will do my best to make sure you don't leave here seeing any heroes in Genesis chapter 34. Because I don't think the text gives us any. That sounds a bit depressing, right? Get ready to think worse than you do of all the people we're getting ready to talk about. And yet I think that's entirely the point. The message today is going to ask a fair amount from you. There are a number of cultural realities that happened during the time of our story that are not shared by us today, and which we will have to understand before we can rightly consider this passage. I don't mean to take our time explaining all of those cultural realities first and then dive in. We're kind of going to do it as we go a little bit. But this passage is in many ways a very perplexing passage to be included in the Bible. But if we remember that Moses wrote these books for the nation of Israel in his day, so they might have these records to instruct and remind them of their history and to equip them to think and live rightly before God, then I think we can begin to understand and appreciate why this text and this story has been passed on to us in the Bible. First of all, it's a true event. And as such, it's important that Moses passes it along to the people of Israel to teach them about their history and the significant moral failures that belong to them as a people. This is necessary in order for the people to understand just how much they have received the grace of God, which was undeserved but freely given. God has kept His promises to the patriarchs who didn't deserve those promises. He's kept His promises not only to them, but even to their descendants, in spite of the undeserving nature of the nation. His standards are high, the very highest even. But His love and His faithfulness to His promises are higher still. He is faithful and true to His word. In this lesson, I think, about their undeserving nature, and His faithfulness to them is pressed upon them in an inescapable way by this awful story of a daughter's defilement and a family's revenge. My approach here is going to be to work through the passage a couple times, sort of peeling back the layers of details as we go, going through the first time, getting a basic understanding of things, and the second time, digging a little deeper. That might sound a little bit tedious and difficult, but I honestly think it's going to be the most rewarding, the most efficient, and the most impactful way to look at the text. It shouldn't take us long. It shouldn't be too difficult. Before I read, I want to say once again, this passage is not about rightful justice, but an arrogant, self-righteous, merciless revenge. That's what it's about. Most of the passage is not about what happened to Dinah. That's just a couple verses. We move on then to talk about how the sons of Jacob responded. It's not about Dinah. Dinah is the occasion to showcase their sinfulness. No excuse for what happened to Dinah. It was wrong. But it's so much not a concern of Moses to describe in detail what happened to Dinah. We're not even sure if she really was raped or not. It seems like maybe you could read it that way, maybe not at all. It's really hard to understand. There's details that are a bit conflicting. The point is the umbrage that the sons of Jacob took and how they responded. So let's begin to read here this text. Hear then the words of God to us. Genesis 34, verse 1. Now Dinah, the daughter of Leah, whom she had borne to Jacob, went out to see the women of the land. And when Shechem, the son of Hamor the Hivite, the prince of the land, saw her, he seized her and lay with her and humiliated her. And his soul was drawn to Dinah, the daughter of Jacob. He loved the young woman and spoke tenderly to her. So Shechem spoke to his father Hamor, saying, "Get me this girl for my wife." Now Jacob heard that he had defiled his daughter Dinah, but his sons were with his livestock in the field, so Jacob held his peace until they came. And Hamor, the father of Shechem, went out to Jacob to speak with him. Who did he go out to? Went out to Jacob to speak with him. The sons of Jacob had come in from the field as soon as they heard of it, and the men were indignant and very angry because he had done an outrageous thing in Israel by lying with Jacob's daughter, for such a thing must not be done. But Hamor spoke with them, saying, "The soul of my son Shechem longs for your daughter. Please give her to him to be his wife. Make marriages with us. Give your daughters to us, and take our daughters for yourselves. You shall dwell with us, and the land shall be open to you. Dwell and trade in it, and get property in it." Shechem also said to her father and to her brothers, "Let me find favor in your eyes, and whatever you say to me I will give. Ask me for as great a bride price and gift as you will, and I will give whatever you say to me. Only give me the young woman to be my wife." The sons of Jacob answered Shechem and his father Hamor deceitfully, because he had defiled their sister Dinah. They said to them, "We cannot do this thing to give our sister to one who is uncircumcised, for that would be a disgrace to us. Only on this condition will we agree with you, that you become as we are, by every male among you being circumcised. Then we will give our daughters to you, and we will take your daughters to ourselves, and we will dwell with you and become one people. But if you will not listen to us and become circumcised, then we will take our daughter, and we will be gone." Their words pleased Hamor and Hamor's sons, Shechem. And the young man did not delay to do the thing, because he delighted in Jacob's daughter. Now he was the most honored of all his father's house. So Hamor and his son Shechem came to the gate of their city and spoke to the men of their city, saying, "These men are at peace with us. Let them dwell in the land and trade in it, for behold, the land is large enough for them. Let us take their daughters as wives, and let us give them our daughters. Only on this condition will the men agree to dwell with us and to become one people, when every male among us is circumcised as they are circumcised. Will not their livestock, their property, and all their beasts be ours? Only let us agree with them, and they will dwell with us. And all who went out of the gate of his city listened to Hamor and his son Shechem, and every male was circumcised, all who went out of the gate of his city. On the third day, when they were sore, two of the sons of Jacob, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, took their swords and came against the city while it felt secure, and killed all the males. They killed Hamor and his son Shechem with the sword, and took Dinah out of Shechem's house and went away. The sons of Jacob came upon the slain and plundered the city, because they had defiled their sister. They took their flocks and their herds, their donkeys, whatever was in the city and in the field, all their wealth, all their little ones and their wives, all that was in the houses, they captured and plundered. And then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, "You have brought trouble on me by making me stink to the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites and the Perizzites. My numbers are few, and if they gather themselves against me and attack me, I shall be destroyed, both I and my household." But they said, "Should he treat our sister like a prostitute?" And it ends. End of the story. It's a shocking and callous response they make. So let me then give you a skeleton outline kind of here, maybe a little more than that. That's wishful thinking, not exactly a skeleton outline of the event. Let me kind of explain it as it happens, and then we'll go back and look in more detail. Dinah, a young woman, a daughter of Jacob by Leah, was left alone to go to the city of Shechem, or she did leave alone by herself to go to the city of Shechem in order to see the women of the land, that is, to learn about them and to join with them, to associate with them, as she no doubt longed for such female friendship and connections with 11 brothers and those sisters mentioned, right? So she wants to go out there. While she was in Shechem, no doubt the women had much to say about the various eligible men of the city, as single young women are prone to do, right? Let's not kid ourselves. I mean, that's just the reality. That's what would have happened, undoubtedly. The prize catch of the city, in terms of status and power, the prince of the city, was Shechem, Hamor's most honored son. While there in the city, this Shechem took notice of her. Oh, her fortune, right? Most honorable, esteemed catch of the town among the young men. Most eligible bachelor in Shechem was a man named Shechem, right? Whether the town was named after him, I highly doubt. More like his father as being the leading man in the city. Shechem is probably a family name. They've named the town that, and they're the leading family in that place, and he names his son. He has the gall to name his son Shechem. Well, guess who's going to be Prince of Shechem? Shechem, right? Who's going to be in charge. So this is his name. So here he is. He's noticed her. He desires her. He wants her. And being in the privileged and arrogant position he had, he approached her directly, seized her, and lay with her. It was a humiliating experience for Dinah. I have once before, in a message I gave here, called it a rape. And I no longer think it was necessarily that one-sided. It may very well have been a rape, but there are some reasons I don't think so anymore, not necessarily, and we'll get into those things later. It certainly appears Dinah was willing enough to be married to him later in the story. Again, more on that later. Now, after he has taken her in this way, Shechem desires Dinah even more. It's not just lust anymore. He wants her as his wife. His soul has gone out to her. He loves the woman. So which makes me think that her interactions weren't entirely one-sided and negative, if he loves her now in this way, now that he's spent some time with her. So he requests his father go with him to arrange a marriage between he and Dinah with Dinah's family. So this involves coming to some sort of terms with her family to get their consent and also to agree on some sort of a bride price. In the case of Dinah, her family were foreigners, and therefore an intermarriage with her family would have consequences for the whole town and would also have consequences for Dinah's entire family. So the brothers of Dinah, the sons of Jacob, are filled with rage at what's happened to their daughter, or to their sister, but coyly they hide that anger, very shrewd of them, and make an agreement with Shechem and his father and the people of that city that all of the men must be circumcised in order for Dinah to marry him. This was a deceitful answer, we're told ahead of time, as they planned to take advantage of the city while the men were unable to defend it. That was at least they were all in agreement they were going to come and take advantage of the city and enact some sort of a revenge while the men were incapacitated. The men of the city, unwitting to the evil plan of the sons of Jacob, consent. They agree and they follow through with the circumcision in order to enrich themselves with the livestock and the wealth of the sons of Jacob. They're told, hey, everything that all their beasts are going to be ours. Like, just come on. Look what a great situation this is going to be for us. These people are so wealthy, we can get their riches. So they agree. Soon after the circumcision, while the men were still sore, tender, and generally unable to function, two of Jacob's sons, Simeon and Levi, rushed on ahead of their brothers and killed all the men of the city. By the time the others came to the city, the deed was done, and as a group, the young men were probably a bit shocked at what they saw at the slain men slaughtered in their weakness, but none of them seemed to have objected. Rather, as a group, the sons of Jacob entered the city and plundered it all. They took the property, the livestock, the children, and the women of the city as plunder. It was a total defeat and a slaughter of the men of the city of Shechem. Upon learning about what they had done in revenge, Jacob made a sharp protest to his boys, especially to Simeon and Levi, who were the worst offenders. The neighboring peoples will undoubtedly learn of this, and when they do, it's likely to rouse them to come against Jacob and his sons, and this puts all the promises of God at jeopardy. Certainly, it's no way to make yourself a blessing to the peoples around you. These two sons of Jacob have soured the reputation of Israel in the land. They've acted in a fit of wrath, not wisdom. Their act was characterized by proud, arrogant self-righteousness, not love for their sister, and not the purposes of God. And as such, Jacob rebukes them. However, they don't listen to the rebuke, but resist it, defending themselves as somehow justified in the slaughter of the city, since Shechem had treated their sister like a prostitute, as though these were somehow equal things. Well, what does all of this mean? Why is it here? What are we supposed to take away from the passage? Some people read this passage and somehow think that the sons of Jacob were justified in their actions. Oh yeah, they shouldn't treat their daughter as a prostitute. They were just really mad. And they just kind of move on. Think, wait a second, that's not a legitimate answer. And the Bible doesn't treat it as that, as a legitimate answer. I mean, but you can see why people read it that way. They give this immediate defense of themselves. They were retaliating for an evil done to them and done to their sister. Also, they have the last word in the account. So it seems that to many people that their actions are not directly condemned by anyone but Jacob, and Jacob certainly has his own faults in the story. So it seems like the Bible's kind of approving of what they did. But that's not the end of the story totally. Simeon and Levi don't have the last word about this. Turn with me to Genesis chapter 49, verses 5 through 7. Jacob has the last word. Look at verse 1. Jacob called his sons and said, "Gather yourselves together, that I may tell you what shall happen to you in days to come." He's prophesying here. And look at verses 5, 6, and 7. These two brothers are lumped together. Simeon and Levi are brothers. Weapons of violence are their swords. Right? You give one of my sons a sword, and what is it? It's a weapon of defense against the wolves when he's a shepherd. But these men, their swords are weapons of violence. Let my soul come not into their counsel. It says, I don't associate with them. Like, they're my sons, but I have nothing to do with them in that way. This is profound. Imagine, let my soul come not into their counsel. Oh, my glory! Whatever the glory of Israel is, this is a good thing. Be not joined to their company. Why not? For in their anger they killed men, and in their willfulness they hamstrung oxen. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. And that is, in fact, what happened to them. But it's all warranted on this misdeed and their evil actions in Genesis 34. So don't think the Bible commends them for this or looks the other way. Characteristic of Jacob, he held his peace for a long time before he responded. It's generally what he did. The Bible, therefore, is clear. We are meant to be shocked at the wrath and the violence of Simeon and Levi, and to never get over it, just as Jacob never got over it. In that sense, then, the words of these sons to defend their actions, even in the face of a righteous rebuke by their father, should serve to shock us further rather than to win the argument with their father. It's amazing. It would be as though the disciples turned to Jesus and said, and he says, "You don't know what spirit you're of." And they said, "We know exactly what they've done. They've insulted you. They should die. Let's go." You think, what are they doing? It just shows even more shockingly how wrong their actions were and their attitudes were. The disciples, thankfully, heeded the rebuke of the Lord. These men of Israel, these fathers of Israel, right? The heads of the clans, they didn't heed this rebuke. They thought they were justified in their actions. What a thing. Notice in verse 7, Genesis 34, verse 7, that the sons of Jacob are outraged, not that such a thing was done in general, just that it was done, that this happened, but that rather that it was done in Israel, or that it was done to their family, to those who have God on their side, so to speak. Look at verse 7, Genesis 34, 7. The sons of Jacob had come in from the field as soon as they heard of it. The men were indignant and very angry because they had done an outrageous thing in Israel. Well, what is Israel? Prince of God. The one God had just given their father this name not long ago, a few years back. We're sons of Israel. This land belongs to us. God is with us. He's going to bless us. We were going to prosper in this place. And these people did such a thing ought not to be done in Israel. By lying with Jacob's daughter, this shouldn't happen. They are sons of the Prince of God, and their sister was treated like a prostitute by a pagan man. How dare Shechem do such a thing? Then in verse 13, when they make their reply to Shechem and his father, they are again said to be motivated by revenge, as they lie to them because Shechem had defiled their sister Dinah. Verse 13, the sons of Jacob answered Shechem and his father Hamor deceitfully because he had defiled their sister Dinah. Who are they? The sons of Israel. Verse 27, it happens again. We read it again. The sons of Jacob came upon the slain and plundered the city because they had defiled their sister. And then verse 31, should he treat our sister like a prostitute? Does he know who we are? We are the sons of Israel. What a thing. They defend their actions not by saying that Shechem should not have treated a virgin woman like a prostitute, which is correct, but rather that he should not have treated their sister like a prostitute. That is certainly taking the Abrahamic blessing and turning it on its head, upside down, is it not? The privilege of Israel was not to exact a frightening and severe judgment upon the nations, but rather to bring a blessing to them. The exalted status of being chosen by God has gone to their heads, and they have imagined that they are justified in any revenge because they're the sons of Israel. Who are these pagan people to think they can be treated in this way? You could hardly imagine a worse misuse of the title of Israel and what that name means than these sons of Israel have just made of it. It quickly brings us back to reality. After all this promising start that it seems like we just read in this last chapter that Jacob had made, this genuine worship of God in the land, he goes to the place where his grandfather Abraham had been and initially established an altar to God. He goes to that place, he buys the land, he establishes an altar, he names the altar, he's there in genuine worship to God. This seems good. And we're on cloud 9 and we're just brought back to earth real quick in this chapter. It appears that none of his sons, 11 of them at this time, are living any closer to God than he was in his younger days. In fact, they appear to be worse than he ever was, especially Simeon and Levi, but it appears that none of Jacob's sons will ever be fit for inheriting the name Israel and all that that means. At least not now, that's for sure. Nobody's a candidate. It's terrible. Wouldn't you, when you were reading about the promises of God to Abraham and some of these lessons Abraham was learning, and God saying, I'm going to teach Abraham these things so that he can instruct his children in righteousness. How shocked you'd be at that moment to read in the next chapter, perhaps, that his grandchildren were doing this sort of thing. It's a terrible letdown, but nonetheless, that is what is happening. Now this explains the major thrust and purpose of the story. We've got enough understanding of it now that we get the groundwork and how it's laid out, what happens. Their revenge, let me say this, should remind us less of God's character and more of Cain's descendant Lamech, right? Who wrote in a threatening poem to his two wives, and I quote. Here's the poem. Remember, I said how many times I said, hang this up in your kitchen, women, right? This is essentially what Lamech did. I have a gift for you, my wives. One for you to never forget, and one for you to never forget. It's a nice little poem I wrote. Ada and Zillah, hear my voice. What trouble did he have with these women that he says this to them? But it's amazing. Ada and Zillah, hear my voice, you wives of Lamech. Listen to what I say. I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for striking me. If Cain's revenge is sevenfold, then Lamech's is 77-fold. This is Lamech. That seems more like the sons of Jacob, doesn't it? That's more like what we've just read about. I have slaughtered an entire city. Why? Well, one of the men there might have raped my sister. Maybe. That's why. So they all die. And what have I done with their families, with their wives? Taken them as my own. They can be my slaves. Or my wives if I choose. Whatever I want to do with them. Their children can be my slaves or servants. Or we can kill them all. It doesn't matter. They can't do that. We are Israel. Our vengeance is 77-fold. Jacob says, what have you done? They say, but they wronged us. They treated our sister Dinah like a prostitute, and that should never happen. Have some self-respect, Father. You're Israel. This is the attitude, and it's shocking. With all of that said, then we can begin to look at some of the other details that will help us understand this all a little better. First, we could ask, what is it exactly that happened to Dinah? That's the big question. What are they so angered about? Well, this is an unpleasant portion of the passage, no doubt, right? But we do have to be clear on this point and know what it is we're speaking about. It could be that Dinah was actually raped. The word used there, when Shechem, the son of Hamor the Hivite, the prince of the land, verse 2, saw her, he seized her and lay with her and humiliated her. The language he saw her and seized her sounds like forcible. He forced himself on her. And the word used, translated in the ESV for humiliated, is often used, not often, but is sometimes used in instances where there clearly is a rape. And you can only think of David's son who lies with his sister. There's no way to read that it wasn't a rape. And that's the same exact word. And he seized her and he humiliated her. It's the same language. So it's like it really seems like this. But it's curious. He doesn't just say he seized her and humiliated her. He saw her. He noticed her and he went and met her. And then there was some manner of which he kind of forced himself upon her in some way. And lay with her. That sounds a little more mutual. And humiliated her. And I think the way to read the humiliated her part here is a summation of the way he treated her. Humiliated her. He defiled her. And that to us, in our culture, sounds like, well, there's only one way that could be a defilement. He must have raped her. But in their culture, there was a way that these relationships went. Like in our culture, like the culture at large, we may as Christians frown upon sexual relationships outside of marriage. But our culture, those days are long gone. It's terrifying to think, but it's almost rare to find a pastor who will confront people in his church about living together and having sexual relationships before marriage. Rather, they just would hope one day they get married and just leave it. It's this terrifyingly low standard in our culture, right? That's where we are. But in that culture, this is an outrage. This is not how you go about obtaining a woman. This is not how you pursue a relationship in any way. There are a lot of right things that culture held on to, and there are some things we can let go, but certainly there are some standards, and Shechem has violated them all. I think it's more likely her defilement and her humiliation were more along the lines of the order of things in that culture. A man does not ever have the right to pursue a sexual relationship with a woman outside of the mutual bonds of marriage and lifelong commitment. That's true for people in general. But especially in these ancient times, when life was so very fragile for the vulnerable, and when ruling by force and might were so common, to take a young woman and sleep with her outside of marriage was harmful to her in additional ways, as it left her without physical protection or a means of livelihood and security. In order to keep this from happening, societies that formed up, people that decided to live in a place together, formed certain agreements. We call them generally laws, right? Around this sort of a thing. In Israel, God gave laws about it, knowing that the nation was a hard-hearted, sinful bunch of people just like the rest of humanity. And so we read, and you can turn here if you like, it would be good to, in Exodus chapter 22, verses 16 and 17, if a man seduces, this is not forceful rape, if he seduces, if he speaks tenderly to a woman such that she says, let's lie together, against all wisdom, she should know better, she's risking so much if she does this. But if the man speaks to her in such a way and he seduces a virgin who is not betrothed, and he lies with her, he shall give the bride price for her and make her his wife. If her father utterly refuses to give her to him, he shall pay money equal to the bride price for virgins. And that sounds very strange to us. People, callous atheists read this, and misinformed Christians read this text and think, oh, so it's just okay, just pay a little money, pay a little fee, and you're fine? You just do this? No, the bride price was a heavy price, friend. Remember, the bride price was something like the 14 years that Jacob had to serve for his wives, 7 years apiece. That was a steep price. But the whole idea was, and Jacob's wives say this to him when he says, well, let's leave. And they say, well, our father spent all our money. What do you mean all your money? The bride price. The bride price was set aside. It was a trust, a financial trust given to the father of the bride to hold in security for her and to provide her with security. Maybe her husband doesn't make a good run of things and they're poor and they don't have what they need and things are bad. He could take that bride price that was paid and give it to his daughter who was in a marriage that wasn't working out, and they could be more secure. Or suppose the man dies and she's left with nothing. There was a bride price that will set her up and provide her with some financial stability. Or she's mistreated and she's divorced and put out without cause. What will she do? Well, there's this bride price that's for her. So if you're a young man and you slept with some woman and you talk with and you've kind of worked this thing out, you better hope her father is approving of you, because you've offended their family greatly. And if he says no, if he utterly refuses to let the two of you to be together, you're still out the bride price. Enough money to provide for her on her own. She doesn't have to ever get married. Why wouldn't she get married? Because she's, in their culture, she's kind of damaged goods. She's not a virgin anymore. She's given herself to another. Who wants that one? So you've insulted the family. You've ruined her future. And you're such a worthless man. The father's not even willing to consider you. You still have to provide and pay for this woman so that she's set up and provided for. It's a severe punishment. It's not just, here's $100, now let me go. It's nothing like that. This is a big deal. Or we could turn to Deuteronomy chapter 22. Deuteronomy 22, another place where this same sort of thing comes up. Deuteronomy 22, verses 28 and 29. If a man meets a virgin who is not betrothed, she's not betrothed or engaged to be married to some other man, and he seizes her, now that's a little more similar, right? And lies with her, and they are found, then the man who lay with her shall give to the father of the young woman 50 shekels of silver, and she shall be his wife, because, why? Because he has violated her. He may not divorce her all his days. Now, I think this is a different situation. Here's a man, he doesn't really want this woman to be his wife. He just mistreated her, treated her poorly a little bit. And the law allows for the father of that woman to collect the bride price and make that man to treat this woman who he just treated poorly, treat her as a bride, as a wife all his days. And he's never, no matter how much anguish she brings him, no matter how bad of a wife she is to him, by law, he can't get rid of her. He can't ever get rid of her. Now, she maybe can go, we don't know, but he can't get rid of her. That's a severe penalty to pay. You mistreat some woman, you are stuck with her for life. You can never get rid of her. And you've got to pay a penalty. It's like, what in the world? That's a big deal. And I'm glad for those sorts of laws. And there's a heavy price to pay, a lifelong price to pay when we mistreat others in these ways and in matters of sexual relationships. That's important. Now, I'll tell you this. There is a law that archaeologists have discovered in Assyria. You want to talk about what an insult this sort of a thing is to the family? In Assyria, they had laws that were similar to the biblical laws, but also they had another one. There's a third option for the father. Here we go. He could demand the offender produce a daughter from his family to be put out into the public square and abused by the men of the city as retribution, as revenge. Not retribution, as revenge. Just sheer vengeance. I'm thankful there's no law like that, right? That God ever gave Israel. Because God's not that kind of a God. Now, the sons of Israel, they might have liked a law like that. But God wasn't going to give a law like that. What an awful thing. But that sort of a revenge is not allowed in Israel, rather only restitution. and financial provision. Now, I'm of the mind that Dinah was likely favorable to Shechem. I think she probably liked him a lot, but was reluctant to face the consequences of her sexual impropriety with her family. No mention is made of her ever returning to her father's house until after the brothers kill Shechem and take her back themselves. Right? That's something. He seizes her, he lays with her, she's humiliated publicly because of what's happened, because people find out about what happened, and she's in a place where she's humiliated now socially. He speaks tenderly to her. He wants to marry her. He speaks to his father, go get this woman as my bride. They go out together to visit the family. Where's Dinah? She's back in my place. Please let me have her as my wife. I don't want to let her go. I love this woman. Right? I think Dinah is likely favorable to this. Now, however we think of Dinah's part in all this, the text does clearly portray her as a victim, at least socially. She might have been raped physically, and that would be awful, and I don't mean to diminish that in any sense. I just mean I'm not sure the text forces us to that conclusion. She might have been very willing in all of this. Nonetheless, socially and in terms of the families, there is a great dishonor that has been done. She's been humiliated. Regardless, she was seized upon for the purpose of sexual relations. It may have been rape, it may not have been. It was certainly dishonorable and in a humiliating way to approach her. As her brothers say, she was treated like a prostitute and not with the dignity she should have been afforded. She's just some woman who's just kind of there. You can just pay a little money and have her. Whatever you want to do. Like that's how she was treated. That's how she was dishonored and humiliated in the town. It's not right. If that was the extent of it, that's enough to be very angry and upset. It seems to me like that's likely the extent of the wrong that was done. So then, what exactly are we to make of Shechem and his father Hamor, I don't know how you say it, coming to reconcile with the family of Dinah? First, consider the self-centered and spoiled way of Shechem. Verse 4, so Shechem spoke to his father Hamor, saying, get me this girl for my wife. He tells his father, after having seized this woman and taken her, and then after all of that, he falls in love with her. Dad, go get her for me. Make this happen. This is shocking. It is, after all, the job of the young man to pursue these things for himself, not to tell Daddy to go make it all work out. Perhaps he knew that he had acted in such a shameful way that the negotiations might need a mediator. Maybe I shouldn't go alone. Dad, come on. I need your help here. Or, since he was the prince of the city, perhaps he needed his father's involvement as the one who was the most honored man there, and he was the most honored among his father's children. Perhaps he needed his father's involvement, since in those days of political marriages for alliance, any marriage he made would necessarily have consequences for the people his father led. Maybe his dad should be there. Perhaps he had continually squandered his possessions and would need his father's help in providing a bride price. I don't know. There's all kinds of things we can think of. He doesn't seem like a man very much in control of his instincts and his desires. Now again, remember, this bride price that they're thinking about going to provide was both a way to set the honor of your daughter. How much should a man pay for my daughter? And also, how much do you value her? And also a way of providing security for the woman, held in trust by her father in the events the future should leave her without a husband. But it was customary, and certainly a man like Shechem would be expected to provide a very hefty bride price. Right? I mean, he's the most honored in the city. What price would a man like Shechem provide? And with circumstances being what they were, with her being humiliated in this way, he has sort of disadvantaged himself in these negotiations that will take place for the bride price. So he's not in a good spot. And so he and his father attempt to plead their case. And Hamor, the father of Shechem, went out to Jacob to speak with him. And the sons of Jacob had come in from the field as soon as they had heard of it, and the men were indignant and very angry, because he had done an outrageous thing in Israel by lying with Jacob's daughter, for such a thing must not be done. So now the scene is set. They're coming to kind of appease things, and Jacob's sons are coming, and they are indignant and angry about the way that their status as the sons of Israel, as the clan of Israel, has been violated. This should not be done. But in contrast to their anger and their being upset, Hamor spoke with them, saying, "The soul of my son Shechem longs for your daughter." Listen, he's in love. It's true love. Right? Which makes me think he's not talking about a rape. If he was talking about rape, he would say, well, I mean, it's something else. He wouldn't say, but he loves her. Like, you wouldn't say that. I think it's more than that. It's mutual. "The soul of my son Shechem longs for your daughter. Please give her to him to be his wife." He wants to treat her as a wife. He loves her. It's a match. It's a perfect match. I know they were impulsive. They went about it the wrong way, and they've brought dishonor upon you. But this is a good match. You shouldn't refuse us. You should give her to him. He'll treat her well. Regardless of whatever you might think about him, I'm telling you, he loves this woman. She's safe with him. And then he changes gears. So now it's, don't worry, she's in good hands. So now it's, and you could advantage yourselves in your position too. What does he say? He's a salesman. "Make marriages with us. Give your daughters to us, and take our daughters for yourselves." We've got some women too. Like, you can just, come on, just take them. They're yours. "You shall dwell with us, and the land, which has not been open to them as foreigners, will be open to you. Dwell in it and trade in it and get property in it. You're going to be rich." Right? What a thing. Shechem also said to her father and to her brothers, "Let me find favor, please," right? "Let me find favor in your eyes. And whatever you say to me, I will give. Ask for me as great a bride price as you want to. I'll provide it. I want her. But he says two things: as great a bride price and gift. The bride price was given, again, to the father to kind of hold in trust for the bride. They weren't really able to take from that. They weren't supposed to. But a gift, now they could a gift. So he's saying, whatever you want, whatever security you want from me to guarantee her future security, I'll give it. I don't care whatever it is. And whatever thing you want me just to give you, for you, I'll give it. I want this woman. Only, and I will give whatever you say to me. Only give me the young woman to be my wife. Don't refuse me. Don't refuse me. So Hamor, on his part, latches onto this idea that, look, you'll be considered part of our community. No more restrictions on what you can do. You can easily trade and profit in this region without restrictions. And Shechem says, look, whatever guarantees you want from me, I'll give. And whatever gift you want, whatever I need to pay you off, if you just feel like I, as a matter of honor, I need to give you something, I'll do that too. Whatever it is, just let this happen. Once a deal is struck, and we will talk about the deal in a little bit, they go to their own townsmen to discuss these unusual terms with the townsmen. Let's just jump ahead to there. Verse 20. So Hamor and his son Shechem came to the gate of their city and spoke to the men of their city, saying, "These men are at peace with us," which is a lie. They are not at peace. They're in the middle of very tense negotiations about a dishonored daughter. We're not at peace. That's an outright lie. "Let them dwell in the land and trade in it, for behold, the land is large enough for them." So he's minimizing, like, what have continually the people of Israel so far, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and his sons, have always run into trouble. They get to a place and there's not room for them and others. Isaac ran into that constantly, right? I mean, there wasn't enough room. They got a lot of possessions. And here he tells them, look, the land's big enough. And it's likely not, but he tells them that. He minimizes the negative part. Let them dwell in the land and trade in it, for behold, the land is large enough for them. Let us take their daughters as wives, and let us give them our daughters. Only on this condition will the men agree to dwell with us to become one people. And they go through that. Look at verse 23. Will not their livestock, their property, and all their beasts be ours? Just let us agree with them, and they'll dwell with us, and we'll be rich. Right? Look at all the stuff these guys got. And when you start marrying with these people, it's going to rub off on us. We're going to make trades with them. We're going to be wealthy. You have nothing to worry about. What an insightful exchange to report. When they present the deal to the town, they lied to the town, saying the family of Jacob was at peace. They were not. But they persuade the men of the city that if they agree to these terms, they'll soon possess all the riches and livestock of the sons of Jacob. And they won't have to give up anything else. Right? It'll work out perfect. They will become rich at the expense of the sons of Jacob. Their livestock will be ours. These men are dishonest. They're disingenuous from start to finish. They just want to work this out for Shechem. Now then, what do we make of the deal that was actually struck between the people of Shechem and the sons of Jacob? Well, we might first ask why Jacob was not more directly involved in the negotiations. Why just was the sons? That's interesting. Why do his sons take the lead? I don't believe the answer to that question is what some have supposed, that Jacob did not care for Leah's daughter Dinah, just as he did not care for Leah. Certainly there was a difference. There were favorites, but to charge him with neglect is probably, I think, a little much. And on this point here and the whole deal that was struck, I want to read from one commentary that I have that just says it so well and concisely. I feel like he does it better than I could. It's not a lot to read, but I'll read for a few minutes here. Here we go. Admittedly, Jacob's reaction to the news of Dinah's abuse at first seems inordinately passive and indifferent, especially when contrasted with the brothers' fiery indignation. But silence need not imply the absence of righteous indignation. It may indicate prudent restraint. Indeed, Solomon may have been thinking of the contrast between Jacob and his sons in Genesis 34 when he penned the words, "Whoever is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he who rules his spirit than he who takes a city." Holding one peace may also be an indication of hope that God will work out a solution that doesn't seem immediately apparent. Furthermore, Moses explicitly limits the duration of Jacob's silence with the phrase, "until the brothers came home." Jacob's decision to wait until Dinah's brothers arrived before responding to Hamor and Shechem's proposal is consistent with the customs of those days, in which a woman's marriage was negotiated with her brothers as well as her father. And I would just interject, you might remember Laban being involved when Rebekah was sent off. It was Laban's father and Laban both who were involved in those negotiations. Laban was her brother. So that's customary. Finally, Jacob's silence during the negotiations and his willingness to accept the terms offered by Dinah's brothers may simply indicate that he was persuaded by the reasonableness of their argument. According to ancient Near Eastern custom and Mosaic law, a man who took sexual advantage of a virgin was obligated to marry her and pay a bride price stipulated by the woman's father and or brothers. Hamor and Shechem were apparently following this custom. They must have had it in their own place as well. But Jacob's sons rightly objected to the prospect of assimilating and mixing with the Hivites, insisting instead that the Hivites adopt the covenant sign of Abraham and become, as it were, Israelites. And let's just look at those verses real quick. Chapter 34, verse 15. Only on this condition will we agree with you, that you become as we are. Right? So they're saying, you have to take on the sign and join us. Like, we're going to dwell in your city, but you have to, from a religious standpoint or a cultural standpoint, join us. You've got to become as we are, by every male among you being circumcised. Then we will give our daughters to you, and we will take your daughters to ourselves, and we will dwell with you and become one people. But if you will not listen to us and be circumcised, then we'll take our daughter and be gone. So they have to become, the only way we can mix is if you become as we are. You can't ask us to become as you are. So you can see how this seems fairly reasonable. You can see how Jacob wouldn't know that the fix was in by this talk. It seems legit. On the surface, this proposal would not only salvage Dinah's honor, but would also maintain Israel's unique identity. Jacob agrees with the apparent wisdom of his sons. Finally, the charge that Jacob's final response, we'll finish that with that. That's all we need to include. That's what I want to say. So, I don't think Jacob's at fault here in any way for taking a back seat. Seems to be a legitimate thing to wait for the sons. The sons, because they have this plan, this deceitful plan, so they speak their piece and it seems agreeable to everyone, so it's not objected to. This is the deal. So the only thing that remains here, really, to talk about is the vengeful actions of Simeon and Levi and the way this works out, and the evil plundering of the sons of Jacob against this town of Shechem. What do we make of this? Well, first, let's be clear. The sons of Jacob are, in fact, the real villains of this story. They're the worst offenders by far. That's not the first time we've seen that kind of thing happen in these Genesis accounts. I mean, the Pharaoh of Egypt looked a whole lot better than Abraham did, or than Abram did down there in Egypt. Did he not? We see this thing again and again. Abimelech looked better than Isaac. That happens from time to time where we come to these instances where in this event, and this thing that happens, in this incident, the pagan people of the land show themselves more righteous than the people that God has chosen to work through. And this is another incident where that same thing happens. Also, we can't forget, God later gives Israel a law in Leviticus 24. This would be good to turn there. Leviticus 24, 17 through 22. Leviticus 24, 17. Whoever takes a human life shall surely be put to death. Whoever takes an animal's life shall make it good, life for life. If anyone injures his neighbor, as he has done, it shall be done to him. Fracture for fracture, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. Whatever injury he has given a person shall be given to him. Whoever kills an animal shall make it good, and whoever kills a person shall be put to death. That sounds, we might think that sounds severe, but actually it sounds like real protection for you if you've wronged somebody. They're not allowed to exercise their wrath like these sons of Israel did. They're halted at exact equality. They can't. It's an eye for an eye, not an arm for an eye, right? Not a life for an eye. It's an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, fracture for fracture, animal for animal, life for life. But keep reading the next verse. It's so important. You shall have the same rule for the sojourner and for the native. I am the Lord your God. So just because some foreigner comes in and say, well, he doesn't belong to Israel, we can treat him however you want. No, the same rule applies to him. If he's wronged you, it's eye for eye, no more. And this is important. That's the kind of law God gives the descendants of Israel, because he knows them. These young and rash men could hardly have run more counter to that law. They acted deceitfully, they acted in bloodthirst. Now, we can't know whether the whole plan was known by all the sons of Israel. It must be, I would say this, it has to be that there was a difference among them, because Simeon and Levi are called out specifically for their part in all of it. They're the ones who acted in this way, and they're also the ones who Jacob specifically rebukes. Then later in Genesis 49, they're the ones called out for the murders. So they certainly stand out as chief instigators. Maybe, again, the plan was, because all the sons of Israel, sons of Jacob, go and plunder. No reason to think Joseph's not included in that, beloved, as painful as it is to say. This is what the sons of Jacob did. It didn't say Simeon and Levi plundered. It said the sons of Jacob plundered. All the sons of Jacob were out there in the field. When they all heard of it, they came in, they were indignant. They all decided to speak deceitfully. But two of them had a little more in mind, it seems. Or at least acted it out, were willing to do. Maybe the plan was all of them to go kill him, and they all kind of chickened out, and Simeon and Levi said, we're still going. Maybe that was it. Or maybe they just plotted themselves to do it when the rest hadn't. It's worth noting that Dinah is described in chapter 34, verse 1. Dinah, the daughter of Leah. Now, she's the daughter of Leah, we know that. But it specifically tells us that. Like, why? Why single her out? The daughter of Leah. Well, it also says later in verse 25, on the third day, when they were sore, two of the sons of Jacob, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers. Weren't they all her brothers? Kind of. We would generally consider most of, half of her brother, more than half of her brothers at this time, were full brothers, sons of Leah. But 5 of her brothers were just half brothers. They were sons of either concubines or sons of Rachel. Right? So they weren't full brothers. But these two, Simeon and Levi, were 2 of her full brothers. And they probably saw it as a greater insult even, personally. They were all sons of the ill-favored wife. They were children of the ill-favored wife. There had to be a sort of a camaraderie among them. None of them were as loved as Joseph. They all knew that. And so they kind of hung together. And now this has happened to Dinah. And they've all got this plan. And these 2 hotheads go out there feeling greater insult, greater derision, feeling more like their father maybe isn't taking it the way he should. And so they go out and murder. Now Reuben, who is her oldest brother in that sense, he was not as enraged as Simeon and Levi. You'd think it would fall upon him as the oldest brother to reclaim the honor of his sister, but he didn't do it the same way they did. Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun, they're her full brothers as well. They're not as enraged. Their plan, though, is cunning but evil. What a misuse of the mark of circumcision. Can you imagine? We're going to take circumcision? Jesus was portrayed with a kiss. That's not what a kiss is for. These men took the covenant sign between them and God to bring blessing to the world through their offspring and used it as a smokescreen, as a Trojan horse to get into the city of Shechem and slaughter the men in vengeance. That is a misuse of the sign. It's amazing God ever had anything to do with them again. God talks about the people, we read in the New Testament, if you have the law and you have circumcision, but you don't keep the law in every detail, your circumcision is as good as nothing. It's counted as uncircumcision. Well, what does this do to it? Surely this is an abuse of this sign that God gave them. It's staggering to think. It would be like us having the Lord's Supper and poisoning the cups, certain cups, and making sure certain ones got it. And as they thought they were taking the Lord's Supper with us, which represented all that God has done for them, we were murdering them. This is like, you can't do that. That's not what the sign means, it's what it's for. That's what they did with circumcision. It's frightening. What did they do then with all the goods that they plundered? Undoubtedly, the camp of Jacob looked much different after this night. He's got a lot of extra people here. A lot of them. And they don't know your customs and the way you live. They're mourning the loss of their fathers and their husbands. You've got all their stuff. They're terrified. I'm sure you're going to kill them. Consider this important point in Genesis 35, verse 2. So Jacob said to his household, this is right after this, 2 verses later, said to his household and to all who were with him, that's his men, and then all the people that were with him, you know, the people from Shechem that were just plundered, put away the foreign gods that are among you and purify yourselves and change your garments. Don't dress the same way. Maybe they were wearing clothes of mourning. Maybe they were just wearing clothes from their culture that represented things in their own religion that needed to be done away with. Verse 4, so they gave to Jacob all the foreign gods that they had and the rings that were in their ears, and Jacob hid them under the terebinth tree that was near Shechem, buried to be forgotten forever. So they've lost their husbands, their fathers, their property, their land, their gods, everything. And they belong to Israel now, to the sons of Israel. They brought in these families of the Shechemites, minus their fathers and husbands. The camp of Israel, I would submit, was a very dark place after all this, for quite a while. Now, in those days, after a military conquest, women were generally plundered, let me say this delicately, in a different way than children. Right? And while the passage does not say anything directly about that, you certainly have to wonder if it happened. Now, as cruel as it sounds to us now, the taking of these women and children was often for one of two purposes. Instead of killing them all, many times you'd recognize they weren't the instigators in the conflict. Maybe, cities went to war, the men died. What do you do with the families and the women and children who are left? You could kill them all, or you can make them your own family if your heart goes out to them, and you could provide for them for the rest of their days rather than leave them to die. Or you spared their lives, but you made them your slaves. One way or another, if you spared their lives, they kind of belonged to you. They were going to learn to love you, and you were going to learn to love them, and you would be a family. Or you just say, I'm not interested in that, they'll just be slaves. And you were made a slave. That's how most people became slaves in the ancient world, is the men of their town lost a battle. And that was that. They were slaves for the rest of their lives. So what then do we make of Jacob's response to his sons? It doesn't sound like a man of faith. You've brought trouble on me. You made me stink to the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites and the Perizzites. My numbers are few. If they gather together a bunch of people against me and attack me, I'm going to be destroyed, me and my whole house. And you want to say, where's your faith, man? God's promised to protect you through you and your descendants after you. But I want to submit something to you about that. Give you another idea here. It may be that he feels his sons have invited a severe discipline from God. Right? And the wrath, and they've also stirred up the wrath of his neighbors in the area. He may feel that because of what they've done, they have forfeited the protection of God. They're open to God's severe chastening. It's not that he's just forgotten God and his fear and worry. He might be very mindful of God and being terrified of what may happen, what they may have just forfeited here. Regardless, we read in the very next chapter that God again affirms to him the name of Israel. And after the events of this chapter, I would say such a reaffirmation seems necessary to me. The lesson then for us is a number of them. One, the promise of God and his faithfulness are determined not by our goodness or our deserving status, but by his steadfast purposes for good. The people of Israel, I think, reading this from Moses, hearing this from Moses, could undoubtedly have been ashamed of their ancestors' actions. And with that comes a strong reminder that the election of God is not a license to sin. It's not a freedom from consequences, as these men supposed. It is a frightening reminder that having the law, having a knowledge of God, having been chosen by God, is not the same thing as walking with God and knowing God personally and serving His purposes in the world. These are different things. Don't say to yourself, well, we have the law, God's delivered us, everything's going to be fine. We can enact vengeance on people with impunity. No, you can't. No, you can't. By the time you get to Genesis, the end of Genesis, you realize, no, you cannot. There are consequences to be had for this. And this scene where they are so indignant as they justify themselves in verse 31 is shocking. It just breaks your heart to see that they're acting in this way and they feel this way. They're so blind to their own sinfulness. It ought, the other thing by way of application, I would hope it had this result for the people of Israel. Certainly ought to have this effect for us. Isaiah 9:6. It ought to make us believe this is absolutely necessary. For unto us a child is born, to us a son is given. Like you look, which child of God, of Jacob is going to give rise to the Messiah who's going to set all the world right and undo the work of the devil and bring us back to Eden? I don't know. These sons of blood. It's not going to be any of these guys. What's necessary? A son's going to have to be given to us. That's what we need. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given. That's what we need. God's got to give it. Someone from the outside is going to have to come in and fix this. It ought to make us desperate for God to answer prayer, right? Particularly that. And for us as believers to be so thankful that God did this. Gave a son, and the government was upon his shoulder. And his name was and is called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. And the only other application I really have of this, we'll close with this, is to bring us full circle to where we started. Is to place yourself here as a son of Jacob, hearing the news, hearing your brother's plot and scheme, what the plan is. Imagining yourself in that situation. Thinking of yourself as one of the disciples of Jesus, having just seen the transfiguration. Coming to this village in Samaria. Being rejected. What do you say? Like, let's not be the ones who say, should we tell fire to come down from heaven on this people, in this village? Consume them? Jesus turned and rebuked them, and they went on to another village. James chapter 1 and verse 20. Very familiar verse. James 1:20. For the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. Right? The anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. We are so prone, like we've been wronged, and we just react all out of proportion. When we're questioned, but I was wronged. Yep. You were. That doesn't justify any of the things that are happening. Right? It's frightening. Which is why Paul says, last text, Romans 13, or Romans 12 rather. Bless those who persecute you. Do not curse them. Bless and do not curse them. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Weep with those who weep. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Never be conceited. How much would have been avoided in Genesis 34 if they'd have followed this counsel? Right? Repay no one evil for evil, but give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of all. If possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. To the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him something to drink. For by so doing you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Well, as I said, it's a pretty sober story, account there in Genesis 34. There are no heroes. Nobody really does well. Jacob really is maybe the least maligned in the chapter, but he's no hero, he's no standout. He just didn't approve of the violent things that they did. But he's no model, really, the way he's handled Dinah and his other children. So, are there any questions, comments, concerns, disagreements, objections, anything that was shared? There's certainly some details that we could have gone into I didn't, but so maybe there's questions that way, or do you have something else you want to say?